more than mercy. Rahma, love. The highest form of love, I believe, in the Quran is Rahma. This love of unconditionality, this desire to see us flourish, this desire to see us restored and do well and be well. When we place ourselves in the custody of a beloved Lord who has written this upon God's self, has bound God's self by this, then we're better able to welcome whatever comes and whoever comes. As Rumi says, that we welcome them as a guide from beyond, even if it's a crowd of sorrows that come to sweep our house empty of all of its furniture. How does the human being do that? Unless that human being has placed himself or herself or themselves in the custody of a beloved Lord who has written mercy upon God's self. And so when we think then about living in a theater where there's so much sickness and death, we remember that death is given to us, and indeed death is one of the practices of the mystics of our tradition and other traditions. That the remembrance of death is a practice not to make us morbid and not to make us people of death, but rather to make us people of life. Because when we embrace death as a reality and an inevitability for each and every one of us, we learn that every moment that we have in this dunya, every moment that we have together in this world is finite and therefore incredibly precious. And so when we live in the presence of death and we live in the presence of sickness, it should push us and inspire us to live more vibrantly, to waste less time, to choose our words more carefully, understanding that these words may be our last words, and that these words may be our legacy for our children, for our loved ones, and for those who will carry on after us. And so the remembrance of death gives us a spirit of detachment. Not that death has no power, or that death is not coming, but rather focuses our attention upon life. And almost every survivor of a near-death experience will attest to this, that having had a taste of death, they come back understanding the preciousness and the importance of a vibrant life. And when you look into their faces, you see the markings of someone who has been to that boundary and come back and lives accordingly with the wisdom that they found in that experience. And so we live vibrantly in this theater of sickness and death, in this theater of loss where people are losing jobs and we are losing our businesses and we are losing our homes and losing the fruits of our labors, losing our wealth. We learn to look for a different kind of abundance. One of those forms of abundance is our community. Because when we are lacking and we are vulnerable and humble enough to let the people in our lives know that we are hurting, it gives our community an opportunity to respond the way the Prophet ﷺ said we should respond. And that is, the moment one part of this body is hurting, we should all be rushing toward it with medicine, with whatever is needed for the restoration of that part of the body. But it means that this experience of loss is also then a lesson in vulnerability. A vulnerability that really should be our default state, our state of groundedness, as we stand and walk honestly on this earth, with God watching and in the presence of the angels and all the other beings. This vulnerability and humility should be our default, but it's not, because we're afraid to be vulnerable. We want to be strong, and sometimes we want to make this religion a religion of strength, which is actually crazy, because our faith is filled with figures whom we emulate, figures who are profoundly vulnerable. Think of Maryam, alayhi salam, a Middle Eastern teenage girl living in a very conservative society who was told that she would be pregnant outside of marriage, which would be a crime punishable by death, then and now. And she has the courage to say, and here I'm quoting from the Gospels, "Let it be done to me as you say." But we didn't talk enough about Mary's courage and about her faith and about her vulnerability, profound vulnerability. So it wasn't so much what Mary did, but it was what God did through that vulnerable person. Because the power of this faith is not my power or the power of any sheikh or sheikha or the power of any country or military. The power of this faith is the power of God. And it is through our vulnerability that God's power becomes manifest in the world. This is not a religion of spiritual triathletes or of super athletes. We are broken, stumbling people. And it is in our inadequacy that God's adequacy becomes manifest. It is in our brokenness that God's wholeness becomes manifest. Because I can't do this. And I have yet to meet a human being that can do this. It is God and God alone who can restore the fragmented pieces of our hearts and our lives into a state of wholeness. But it is hard to be vulnerable, to let go. It is hard to resist the temptation to act strong and to be honest about the fact that we are not sufficient even unto ourselves, but God is sufficient unto us. And as we embrace our vulnerability, and as we do so with absolute faith, that if we sincerely invite God into that vulnerability, that God can do amazing things. It's only then that we can begin to open up and to live in a state of gratitude. And finally, we come to the title, my provisional title of this khutbah, which was Love in Dangerous Times, a slight rewording of a song that I dearly love. But love in dangerous times, when we are anxious and we are fearful and we are angry, we cannot love, because the heart becomes contracted. The heart becomes a hard, closed, narrow place. And so we cannot love. But love is the response to this feeling of warmth, this feeling of divine promise. And so love, like gratitude, can do the opposite of what fear and anxiety and anger do. And so it's imperative that we learn to love in these dangerous times. And this is exemplified by so many people that we may know. People who were given a terminal illness, people who were given terrible news, but instead of becoming bitter and angry, opened like flowers. While others will shut down and become angry and bitter and self-absorbed. Not to criticize anyone who's in that state, but to say that for us to embrace our faith as a restorative mechanism, as that mechanism designed for this world between the gardens, that can begin us walking a path toward our true selves, begin us walking a path toward God, begin us walking a path toward meaningful peace and healing. This religion has been given to us not as something we will need beyond the boundaries of this life, but as a restorative mechanism to begin this process of restoration and recovery, so that we come to a place where we discover that the garden is not waiting for us in some other world and in some other time, but that the garden is within us now. And our choice, regardless of what's happening in the world, regardless of what's happening in our lives, our choice is a choice to live in that garden or to live somewhere else as outcasts and as people who block the promise of hope and restoration and happiness. And so I think the most beautiful passage I've recently found, or I've recently seen about love, comes to us from Persian poet Hafiz. And Hafiz writes, "How did the rose ever open its heart and give this world all its beauty? It felt the encouragement of the light against its being. Otherwise, we would all remain too frightened." And so as I talk to myself, and as I talk to my family, and as I talk to my friends and family, and my friends and loved ones, I want to encourage us, and myself first and foremost, not to give in to the fear, not to give in to the anxiety, not to give in to the anger. It's okay to feel it, but it's not okay to submit to it. It's not okay to surrender to it. This idea of surrendering to Allah, surrendering to God, was given to us as a liberation from all these other lords and all these other fears, not as another form of subjugation. We have to understand our faith to be a restorative, liberating mechanism that will help coach us and guide us beyond fear, beyond anxiety, beyond anger, so that we can begin to feel the warmth of the light against our skin, and we can begin to open in gratitude and in love. And there are many practical ways that we can open up in love. I know that there are many angry people who are refusing to wear masks because they believe that it's their right to be maskless and to be infected and infect anyone that they come into contact with. But the liberation that is love is not a liberation of being able to do whatever we want. That's not the kind of freedom we're talking about. The kind of freedom we're talking about is a freedom that includes self-restraint. And so the restraining of myself, the restraining of my own freedom in love means that I don't go out and recklessly endanger other people whom I love or other people whom I don't even know well enough to love. Wearing a mask might mean that I'm doing an act as an act of love. I'm protecting the healthcare provider who is caring for me or might be caring for one of my loved ones. Distancing can be a form of love because I want for you what I want for myself, and that is I want you to be well and healthy and safe. Sharing our resources with those who have lost all of theirs is an act of love. Reaching out to those in isolation is an act of love. And so this freedom that we're talking about, this liberation of monotheism that we're talking about, is not a freedom of doing whatever we want. It's a freedom that comes with love. It's a freedom that means we become liberated from all of these selfish impulses, which can lead to the anger, to the anxiety, and all of these false self-identifications, identifying myself with a socioeconomic reality, identifying myself with a degree, identifying myself with a particular face or particular body, identifying myself with a particular skill set or a particular swag. All of these things can be taken away and all of these things fade. But the one thing that doesn't fade is the presence in the face of God. That's the one thing that abides. And so as we gaze upon that face and we become liberated in that love, we open like flowers gratitude, then we understand that whatever is given to me in this life is meaningless unless I'm willing to share it. And so the call now, as we end Ramadan and we go back to life, not as it was before, but a new life, is the call to live a life of love, of radical love, of crazy love, a love that doesn't always make sense in worldly, dunyawi terms, but to live that life of love in the midst of the danger, in the midst of the fear, in the midst of the anxiety. So many beautiful supplications have been said, and so many of those were right off the tablet of my own heart as well, that we'll just offer a few supplications. We'll do a final takbir, and we'll say Eid Mubarak, inshallah. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. Surely God and the angels all send their blessings upon the Prophet Muhammad. O you believe, send your blessings and your salutations and your prayers upon him abundantly. اللهم صل وبارك وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل محمد إنك حميد مجيد. O God, send your blessings and your salutations and your peace upon the Prophet Muhammad and upon his family. Surely you are the one who is glorious and praiseworthy. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. O Lord God, appoint for us in this world that which is good and wholesome, and in the next world that which is good and wholesome, and save us from the torments of the fire. O Allah, we ask you to save us from the fires that burn within our own minds and our own hearts and our own bodies, the fires of selfishness and judgment, the fires of greed, the fires of destructive anger. We ask you to save us from the fires that are burning within our families and our communities, fires of abuse, fires of oppression, fires of domination, fires of violence. We ask you to save us from the fires that are raging all across this world, fires of war, fires of poverty, fires of curable disease, fires of incurable disease. We ask you, O God, to save us from these fires, the fires of discrimination, the fires of violent oppression. We ask you to save us from all of these fires and guide us along paths of peace into the light of your presence, into the light of your restoration, your restoring love, into the light of your forgiveness. Ya Arham Ar-Rahimin, O you who are the most loving and merciful of all those who manifest love and mercy. O Allah, we ask you to accept our striving, bless our striving, and accept our fasting, whatever form our fasting and striving may have taken during this month. We ask you to bless it and to accept it. We ask you to amplify whatever good that we have done or whatever good that we have intended to do. We ask you to forgive us all the times that we've forgotten, all the times that we have slipped. We ask you to purify our deeds, to place a light in all that we have left behind now. Place a light to our right and a light to our left, a light before us, a light above us and a light beneath us. O God, increase us in light. Place a light in our speech, O God, a light in our eyes, a light in our hearts. O God, place a light in our loved ones who have gone before us, who have died. Place a light in their graves, and place a light in our graves. Place a light in this world and the next world, O God. Increase us in light, for you are the light of the heavens and the earth. O God, we ask you to bless our deeds, to guide our deeds, to bless our intentions and guide our intentions, to guide us first and then to guide others through us. O God, we ask you for this, humbly, aware of our need for you, aware of your sufficiency. As we say, Hasbunallah, God is sufficient for us. O God, we ask all of these things. We ask for your blessings upon the Prophet Muhammad and his family. We ask for your blessings upon all of the messengers, those whose names we know and those whose names we do not know. We ask you for your blessings upon all of the awliya, your friends, those sanctified souls, those women and men in every faith and in every part of the world and in every part of history who have been living witnesses to your truth, to your love, to your restorative power. Those who have stood for the dignity of the creation and those who have stood for the dignity and stand still for the dignity of the creation and the dignity of the human form in all of its forms. Oh God, we ask for your blessings. We seek your guidance. We seek your forgiveness. We seek your constant companionship, remembering that you are always near. Alhamdulillah ya Rabbil Alameen. And all praise be to you, O Lord of the world. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. La ilaha illallah.